all right. I know you've been wanting to know if now is finally the time to buy a freaking graphics card. We've been waiting for so dang long to finally say, yes, now's the time. But my friends, hold your horses. I don't think that now is the best time. You'd obviously be better off buying now than you were a year or two ago, but you should still wait. And I have a lot of proof to back up why you should still wait, including our 64 graphics card analysis that we've been running for the past year or two now. We've just been taking like increments every 3 or 4 months, looking at eBay prices for a plethora of SKUs out there, and kind of just trying to gauge or project where we see prices headed in the future. There's a lot to dive into here. I hope you enjoy it. Stay with me. To get rid of that annoying Windows activation watermark, head on over to VIP SCD Key and purchase a Windows 10 Pro OEM key for a fraction of the price of retail. Just use a secure payment method like PayPal, enter your product key into your PC settings window, and say bye-bye to the watermark. And be sure to use our offer code SKGS for a sweet discount. Now, unlike what we usually do on the channel where we film a few weeks in advance, let's say, and then by the time the video comes out, maybe there's just new info or the prices have changed or what have you, I want this video to be as relevant as possible, so we're only filming it a few days before it goes live. And so this is late June here. The data you're going to see is labeled July, but I don't expect prices are going to change within a week, at least not to the extent that they have in the past month. But I just wanted to be relevant for those who are clicking early on in these videos, and that's a huge help to us. So thank you for that, for clicking as quickly as some of you do. When you see a video hit your inbox, you're just like, yeah, I gotta watch it. Thank you for that. That's pretty awesome support. And hopefully these videos are not only entertaining, but also informative to an extent. This one I expect will be more informative than entertaining, although you might find the fact that miners are like dumping their cards out of just sheer panic entertaining. I happen to think so. Anyway, it is exciting to see prices finally look somewhat reasonable again. My benchmark graphics card for the longest time has been the GTX 1070. Not a new 1070 at MSRP, which was around $400 or so. A used 1070 2 years ago, or pre-Mining Craze 2.0, was about $200, and that was a pretty sweet card for the money, at least until the 1660 Super came out, and I think that bumped that card down to about $150 or so on the used markets. Well, now we're starting to see them sell for just that, around $150 or so. Some creep up near $200. I think the sweet spot's around $150. But if you're in the market for a card that, it's just a tried and true 8 gig frame buffer, it just works. It's not going to give you like the craziest 4K performance out there, but it's a solid 1080p and maybe mid 1440p performer. I think this is one to consider at a budget price point of $150. It's a pretty darn good card. It's also very efficient thanks to the Pascal architecture. Newer cards like the RTX 3060 Ti are also pretty decent deals right now. MSRP is around $400 for this, so again, similar class to the 1070 when it came out. You can see some of these are selling for at MSRP or even slightly below that. In this case here, $370 bid up there. Now it's selling from Hong Kong. I wouldn't really call this this isn't really representative of everything. Most of them are selling for about $450 or so, but still, it's not bad. I mean, considering we were paying $800 or more for these cards 6 months ago, you can see just how quickly things have corrected. But it ain't all sunshine and rainbows. Just because these prices look good now relative to 6 months ago, doesn't mean that everyone should be buying them in bulk. The key phrase is relative to 6 months ago, right? What they used to be priced at was just awful, and anyone buying then was desperate. You had to be desperate to buy and pay that much for a card for gaming. Now, if you were mining, you were speculating. That's a different argument. But just for pure entertainment purposes, maybe you make a living gaming, again, separate argument. If you're just gaming, though, just to game, just to have fun, paying $800, $900 for a 3060 Ti when it came out, I mean, you were pretty desperate. You had to be, because that price you knew didn't make sense to the normal consumer. But seeing what we're seeing here, I mean, just look with RTX 3080s, right? $700, $625. I mean, these look really good. And you'd obviously see much more value in these cards today than you would have then, but that does not mean that you should automatically buy them. Now, I'm going to show you some graphs based on data we've collected over a year ago and in increments leading up to this point, so you can see the general trend, and maybe this will shed some light onto why I think buying now is still not the best time. So here we go, a bunch of numbers, and I know this might look daunting on the surface, but I guarantee you it's gonna be very palatable once I explain what you're looking at. By the way, if you've seen some of our earlier 64 graphics card analysis videos, this is nothing new to you. You can skip ahead to when we talk about the newer graphs. Basically, in a nutshell, what we've done here is ranked graphics card value based on times by mean scores and MSRP. That's what this far left chart does. And it's very easy to understand. So let's consider this RTX 3090 here, just happens to be up top. It has a score in time spy. If you look it up, this score might have changed because I gathered this data several months ago. And that's why we're sticking with the same cards throughout this entire process. You'll notice the 3060 Ti is not in this graph or in this chart. There's a bunch of other cards that aren't here that were released after this chart started. And I know that these scores typically do change over time. Just more people will run the test. That affects the mean, obviously. But these scores have not changed, at least in my database, since gathering these, 12 plus months ago. Anyway, 3090 had a mean time SPY score of 19,858 and an MSRP of 1499. Now, to calculate value, it's very simple. It is just a ratio of score and price. That gives us value. That's basically performance per dollar. And that value in this case is 13.25. I have a rank here, so this rank 27, so kind of in the middle. You'll notice that the newer cards, which are more powerful, tend to score higher than the older SKUs they replace just because of the nature of tech. Tech improves over time, so you get better value out of that tech. Now, obviously, MSRP is irrelevant if the card isn't selling for MSRP, and for the longest time, it hasn't been, of course. So what we did over the 4 or 5 times we've taken data from eBay, is we have taken the last 10 sales of graphics cards that are not broken or sold for parts or whatever. They're legitimate sales that you can find on ebay.com of all these different SKUs, all 64 of them or so. And that new average sale price on eBay is what replaces MSRP. And that variable is what changes the inferred value of the card. So what you see in this column is the same calculation I showed you before, only instead of MSRP, we have ESP, or eBay sale price. So over time, as this value changes, or excuse me, I shouldn't say value, because this is also called value here, but as this ESP changes, the implied value of the card changes. So in March of 2022, 3060 had a value of 17.05. Well, we scroll up here to November 2021, the 3060 Ti had a value of 13.26. So the value actually went up for this SKU between November of last year and March of this year. And we did this for every single card at several points throughout 2021 and 22. Okay, I know that might be a lot, and I might not have explained it the best way. We have other explanations of the exact same thing in our previous graphics card analysis videos, which I'll have linked in the video description if you're interested. Anyway, let's get to the graphs, because that's the juicy stuff. So here we go. This is graphics card scores plotted against value. Scores being the time SPY scores, the mean, so the further to the right the card is, the higher performing the card. And across all these different scatter plots you'll see, the X position of the SKU shouldn't change because the scores remain the same throughout all these different points in time. We didn't change the scores as more people entered and submitted their scores on 3D Mark's database, etc. The value is on the Y-axis, and this is what will change, how high or low each of these SKUs appears over time. So take, for example, the Titan V, right? Pretty awful value Titan cards traditionally are for gaming. So while it does score relatively high compared to the bulk of cards in this list, it scores rather low on the value side of things, which is why it's closer to Y equals 0. A card that is a fairly decent value is the RTX. Actually, we do have an RTX 3060 Ti in here. Maybe it's the 3060 that's not here, and then the 3050, etc. But the 3060 Ti was a really great value card at MSRP. You can see it scores way up here at 30, and it's a decent performing card as well. Yeah, kind of like halfway. Well, actually, it's a bit above the bulk of the curve, but it's definitely not as powerful as, say, an RTX 3080 or definitely a 3090. So we've got MSRP here. Now, we're going to switch to April 2021, okay? You see that there? How the Y-axis is the same, values up to 30. The score axis, the X-axis, is also the same. But all of these cards now are a much lower value. And that's because we took into account eBay sale prices instead of MSRP. You can see that our trend line also skews downward, which implies that the better performing cards are worse values, which is also, it's kind of a weird way to look at it. But if you think about the nature of tech, like we said earlier, the higher performing cards tend to be the newer cards as well, which is why they tend to be better values. And that's why our MSRP chart shows that, these higher end SKUs are, just better values. They score higher up on the Y-axis. But in this case, they don't. And these cards were in hot demand because they were new. There were so few of them, and miners loved them, especially the 3060 Ti, 3070. And there's a lot of older AMD cards and things that were being used for mining as well. Those were massively affected. Now, this is August. Again, same Y-axis. You can see a general shift upward. This was a great sign. It showed that cards were becoming slightly better values overall. Then we swapped to November 2021, and things kind of went down again. And I have a feeling this had a lot to do with the holiday season. Folks who were waiting to buy a gaming PC were just, they were kind of at the mercy of whatever card was available at any given time. Some of them ended up buying used, secondhand, third hand on eBay, and that was at least partially to blame here for why these cards went down in value. And then back up to March. This is the y-axis is a little different here. So March is good again. So we still have that slightly negative trend line, but you can see that cards are much better values, looking pretty sweet, at least compared to November. I'm double skipping because there's a graph in the middle here that is pretty important. Anyway, this is the exact same chart. I just have scaled the y-axis a tad. And the reason I've done that is because, well, I needed to bump the y-axis up a lot because cards are now, in July, roughly, 2022, much better values. Look at how much higher these cards are scoring. In fact, remember our previous graphs cut off here at 30? Again, that didn't fit. Like, all these cards, they were much higher scores than that, much higher values. And it's because eBay sale prices, in general, plummeted. And as the denominator in any ratio decreases, the result, the quotient, increases, that being value. These cards are much better values today, and that is pretty awesome to see. So again, we go from March 2022, it was okay, it was a trend upward, which was good, to this. That is a huge increase in value for almost every SKU we logged, with few exceptions. I think the GT710, you can see down here at the bottom left, that score really didn't change because I didn't notice a difference in price when we calculated the mean. We averaged all of these prices to the nearest $50 mark. The GT710, I think, went down an extra like $20 or so, but it wasn't enough to ultimately change too much in the way of our scoring here. The Radon 7, cards that just aren't, like, they're pretty scarce. There aren't many of them, and they're just not used for gaming. They're not bought and sold very frequently on eBay. Even that card went up in value, a pretty decent amount. The Titan cards did as well. I mean, just look at, okay, let's consider a pretty popular card here, the RTX 3080, scoring somewhere around a 15 on the value chart. Check this out. Way up here, a 25 now. Look at that 6800 XT. This card was kind of in the same boat as a 3080 for a very long time, and it jumps way up here to a score of 35. That's a really compelling offer for folks looking for a very powerful card in mid-2022. But there's one other graph that I think just is the icing on the cake, and this is going to better explain what I'm about to talk about, which is the right time to buy. And that's this chart right here. So this shows the value of certain SKUs listed here at the bottom over time. I've highlighted a few in different colors just so you can see how those change. So consider the GTX 980, a very old card, Maxwell architecture. If you're in the market for something that's fairly cheap, that still packs a decent punch in 1080p, you might consider this. And you can see the value was kind of just, it was always okay. And then check this out. Look, between March and July, how sharp that value increase is. That is phenomenal. Another card, a GTX 1080. From November, a pretty awful value, to March, on an upward trend, and that trend continues with almost the same slope in July. Good news. And other newer cards like the RX 5700 XT, highlighted in blue, we can see that trend is actually showing an increase in slope over time. Now, this doesn't mean that all of these are going to continue becoming better and better values. That would imply that these would, these prices would be approaching $0. Nothing's ever going to be worth $0. There will be a point at which this levels out. In fact, I imagine it will be somewhat soon, probably around September, October, especially when the holiday season approaches. There will be more pent-up demand that will work its way into eBay, and you'll start to see more competition that will, of course, raise prices, or at least offset the sharp decrease in prices that we've been seeing for the past few months. So I think the sweet time to buy is not July, but probably somewhere around August, September timeframe. We also need to consider that new 40 series graphics cards may be launching within this time frame, which should pull demand from 30 series and older NVIDIA cards, along with AMD counterparts. I remember when Ampere was first announced, owners of Turing cards began dumping them for super low prices. This is something we made a video about. It was such a big deal, and the deals were actually super good. I told people to buy them because they were never going to be cheaper than this for a very long time. And it turns out Ampere's supply was super constrained right out of the gate and a victim of massive scalping. A similar thing might happen again. So if you can wait, do wait. I don't think you have anything to lose. At this point, prices are changing so quickly, they are dropping so quickly that it just seems a bit premature to jump on board and buy something now when the trend suggests that prices will continue to fall. Let's consider the price of Ethereum, which I think is driving a lot of the a lot of the panic selling right now that you're seeing on eBay. A lot of folks mined Ethereum with graphics cards you're probably gaming with right now. Now, if you bought a new card, of course, that's not possible. But if you bought a used card on eBay, it's a pretty good chance it was used for mining. Why else would you be selling now at the worst time in the past 2 years? Now you can see these prices around early 2021 shot way up from 600 bucks or so to over 1,000 in just not even a month, it looks like here. That price went all the way up to its peak of around $4,600, and today it has plummeted down to just over 1,000. In fact, I expect with this trend that Ethereum will continue to drop below $1,000. I just don't think there's enough support for now. People are too bearish when it comes to any sort of investment. There was the idea that cryptocurrency was going to be that alternate store of wealth when people were bearish of the stock market, but the last year or so has proven that people are just as speculative on all these different cryptocurrencies as they are, stocks in the New York Stock Exchange. So unless you were mining around 2019, 2020 and you sold today, I mean, even if you sold at this point, which would, you missed out on a lot of earnings there. If you sold that earlier, you'd made a ton more money, but you're still making 4 or 5 times that. I don't think that miners are going to be dumping many more cards into the market than there are now, so that might be the one reason why you decide to just jump on board now, because there might not ever be more supply than there is currently. But that said, there are a lot of folks who still think Ethereum is going to shoot right back up again and maybe even be worth more than it was a year ago. This is all speculation. I don't really like to make videos like this because I just don't follow these markets well enough to make any claim one way or the other. What I will say is that there is a very distinct relationship between the price of, say, Ethereum or just cryptocurrencies in general and the price of graphics cards on the used market. I mean, just look at the 70 series SKU. For example, 3070s are very popular cards. They were at MSRP, but then they very quickly ran out of stock. You couldn't buy them, etc. This is an XC3 Ultra from EVJ. This is a killer AIB for $425 under MSRP. Buy it now. This wasn't even a bid up card. This was something you could immediately pay 425 bucks for with free shipping and have it show up at your doorstep. This is an awesome deal. If I had seen this when I was shopping, I would have bought one. And at this price point, it really can't be beat in this market. That said, however, there are many listings that sold for prices I would not pay. And this is why I've been telling folks in general that they should wait a bit longer. The fact that there are still 3070 selling for the mid to high fives suggests that prices have a solid ways to go. I mean, look, this person here paid 2 times what he should have for a 3070 because it was a white version of an Asus Strix card. It is what it is. This one here for 450, very similar. This one here bid up to 450, not bad. 434 here, 450. This one sold for 510. Someone overpaid for that, I think. This one shipped and sold from the United Kingdom, $552. The UK is different. International markets I can't really speak for because currencies and availability are very different over there. This one, a 3070 Supreme, 540 bucks. Not worth it. It's a great SKU, but not worth it in my opinion. Let's see, we've got a few others here. 550 bucks for a Founders Edition model. Founders Edition cards are pretty sweet. NVIDIA did a great job with this one. I don't like the proprietary connector, but apart from that, it's a solid SKU. But 550 bucks? Again, some of these prices have a decent ways to go. That's why I don't think that now's the best time to buy. If you find one for mid to low fours, the 3070 we're talking about here, jump on board. I don't think you have much to lose there. But the market as a whole hasn't fully rebounded yet. And so you have to be careful. In general, I would say no, just give it another month or two. But it doesn't mean that it's not worth looking. Because if you do find that one listing that has a buy it now price of $400 for a 3070 and it's a decent, reliable SKU, it's going to be pretty difficult to say no to that, especially if you've been waiting several months or years even to buy a card like this. Now, back to this chart quickly, some of the best value cards relative to each other, right? At this point in time, this isn't just saying that like, for example, the 5600 XT, a value of 37. Oh, this must be an awesome card. Well, okay, it scored 7591. A 6800 XT scored more than double that. Yet, the 5600 XT is the slightly better value because he has to take into account ESP, right? So that's all this is here. This conditional formatting just shows you which cards are the better values relative to the other values in this column. The 570, the RX 570 is a card that was a pretty sweet value here that I found at $100 or so on average. The 5600 XT, of course. The 6800 XT was a very surprising, high-performing card with a relative value of 35. You can find an RX 6800 XT for around 500 bucks or so at this point. That's going to be hard to pass up on. There was, yes, the 1070 here. If you can find a 1070 for 150 bucks and you're in the market for a 1080p performer, a value of 40 is just that's pretty darn awesome. The 1050s I didn't find were all that compelling values. 17, not too good at this point. The 1030, if you're spending $100 for a 1030 when you could be spending $100 for a 1050, unless you have a power constraint or like a form factor limitation or something, this just doesn't make any sense here. Radeon 7, don't buy this for gaming. Another 39.6 in the value department was a ironically, a 390, R9 390. This was around 100 bucks or so on average on eBay. Pretty sweet, but it is a power consumer. Just mind the performance as well, what to expect there. There were a few others here. Let's see. We've got the 290, 390X. Actually, this one's not very good. The 980 Ti was pretty good. Value of 38 there. For around 150 bucks, this is a pretty sweet steal. You're going to get 6 gig frame buffer here versus the standard 4 that you might find in the 970 in the Maxwell lineup. Let's see. There was one other one. Yes, a GTX 980 with a value of 43. This is one of the highest value cards that I found to date. And if you can find it for around 100 bucks, and again, manage your expectations with the performance of this card, it's a pretty phenomenal value. Now that said, the worst value card in this list continues to be the GTX 710, the score of 192 in Time Spy, which is like barely any score at all. You can still find these cards for like 30, 40, 50 bucks online. I have no idea why people are buying these cards for these prices. A value of 384 is just abysmal. But yeah, I mean, look at these 980s, right? 4 gig cards, 130 bucks for this one, $100 for this one. Do account for shipping as well. 100 bucks for this card, $100. These are very consistently found for anywhere between 100 and 120 bucks at this point in 2022. And if you want just a solid 1080p gamer, going to be a bit more liberal on the power consumption. But other than that, a fine card, a fine older card. This is a pretty sweet value. Just wanted to show you. I'm not making these numbers up. You can find these being sold all the time on eBay for around 100, 120 bucks now. Look at this one, $75. That's insane. So hopefully this video has shed a bit of light into the current state of the graphics card market. Hopefully you understand now why I'm suggesting you do wait a bit longer as well. I'm not saying you shouldn't look, because you might find that one unicorn listing that is definitely worth pulling the trigger on. But as a whole, some of the newer SKUs especially haven't really hit their bottom. And we can see that because some listings are just significantly lower, selling for significantly less money than others, comparable SKUs even, whether it be a low hash rate card or not. The fact is, most folks buying cards today are doing so for gaming on eBay. I'd be willing to put up money on that. If you're buying a card for mining at this point, with the price of Ethereum and every other cryptocurrency, it seems just plummeting in value. I mean, that's some pretty heavy speculation. You might end up with 10, 20 cards you don't really need. And by the time you want to turn around and resell those, they might be worth even less than you paid now. So maybe you decide to mine with them, but I'd wager most folks buying on eBay today are buying to game with them. And we're just not there yet. We're in the, in the maturing phase, but I think the next month to 2 months will be the sweet spot to buy a card for a price that we haven't really seen in a really good while. What, 2 years it seems? That's a long time to have to go without a graphics card. Just be patient, be diligent, do your due diligence, and make sure that what you end up buying is as described, because if it's not, get your money back, or at least try to. eBay's pretty good about it. I know folks are just like, oh, I don't want to spend money on eBay. I don't want to take a chance. The eBay buyer protection guarantee is pretty good. I've had, more than 1 or 2 issues with things I've bought online, and eBay almost always gives me my money back before I even have to send the card back to the owner or whatever I'm buying. Most cards that I've bought, graphics cards, have worked. And I think the sellers know this, right? Like if you're consistently selling things that are not as advertised, if they're broken, but you say they're not, eBay's first off going to flag the account. You'll have to restart, the whole review process. You'll have to earn your rep again. It's a hassle. So I think eBay does a decent job holding sellers accountable. That's not to say there aren't bad apples out there, but I think in general you shouldn't be afraid to try your luck on a used card. Whether or not it was mined with, that's a separate story. We have a video talking about whether or not you should consider buying a used mined with graphics card. But again, we're getting there. We're in the ripening stage. Check out, especially during August, September. I'm sure we'll follow up with other videos around those times as well about deals we find on eBay. But those are going to be your sweet spot times, I think. Unless something radical happens the next month or two, which at this point, just given recent historical precedent, it could happen. I wouldn't put it past us as a planet, as a species at this point. Thank you so much for watching this far in this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by giving this one a thumbs up. Consider subscribing, leave a comment down below, and I will catch you in the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks so much for learning with me.